you. So what this panel is going to be looking at is focusing on audience measurement as we enter more of a multi-screen world and some of the best ways that are happening to track the space and make sure that it's being taken advantage of commercially. Chris, I was hoping you might be able to start by just giving me a brief overview of what it is that you're trying to achieve.
So TView is the brand of that we're called. Emirates Media Measurement Company is the legal entity. We're creating a TV rating system for the UAE, and we hope that eventually it will be something that's adopted by all the markets in this region. There hasn't been, believe it or not, an actual measurement system that runs in this region until now. You know, there are surveys, there are other ways of doing it, but there is no actual way that measures the viewing. This is something that is in 60 countries around the world. It's been the state of technology for 20 years in the rest of the world, and it doesn't happen here, and it has had a dramatic effect on the market. So we are rolling out a system called People Meters, which puts a device into people's homes, and it reflects a sample of the population, and it gives you a minute-to-minute measurement of what the audience is watching, and also, very importantly, what advertisements they're watching.
So it's a transparent, accurate measurement tool for television, linear TV viewing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Chris, how does that fit with what it is that you're doing?
Brendon.
I beg your pardon,
sorry.
Brendon. I'm
That's
so
addressed
sorry.
me? Okay, great. Well, actually, what Chris just said is very similar to what we do in the online world. So we have a slightly different methodology. We measure through two different methods. One is through a panel solution, which is very similar to what Chris has for TV. And we have a census-based measurement solution as well. So we measure just over 1,000 websites in the region directly through a JavaScript code. So we measure every interaction that goes to these sites. And we also measure through a panel across various markets, about 4 or 5 markets, 5 markets now, on a metering basis like Chris. So I think as of last month, we measured for the MENA region around 165 million devices. In the MEA region, it's over 200 now per month. So again, it's very much about bringing transparency and an insight into the audience, because the discussion is about audience. It's not necessarily just about traffic. It's about where the audience is, and that enables clients, agencies to discover where those audiences are and then place investments where that audience is.
And what's the net effect that you're anticipating of securing a common currency and more accurate measurement?
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, it settles a lot of arguments. We've had lots of sessions today about which is the first screen, which is the second screen, who watches more, who watches less. Well, we're the guys who can tell you. So it establishes facts. It establishes actual data and research in the market. And in a broader sense, there is a lot of evidence, some very good evidence and research that's been done that suggests that this market has been held back terribly by the fact that there isn't an accurate and transparent way of measuring. This is a market that has more people than the European Union, it has a GDP bigger than Germany, and it has an advertising market as big as Turkey. This is the MENA region. So there is a huge discrepancy in the volume of population, in the spend that takes place. And a lot of that is because big multinational advertisers, we know from talking to them, they put as little in this region as they can to be here and have a presence and not have anybody say, why don't you have anybody there? But because they don't know their return on investment, because they don't know where that money is being directed, they don't do any more. And that is what we're hoping to change. And ultimately, that means more money for programs. It means more money for broadcasters and other media to buy digital content. It means better creative. It means more money around the whole ecosystem.
And what needs to happen for this to take place?
Everybody needs to adopt systems like ours as the currency, and it needs to happen. This is an unusual market in many ways in that it works on a pan-Arab, or at least a pan-Gulf basis. So whereas in other markets, say Europe, you can have your UK ratings and your French ratings, your German ratings, and that's how people buy and program. Here, people are buying and programming across the whole region. So we are really, and I think the industry is looking to us and the UAE system as a pilot. The UAE is a market that is big enough to matter, but not so big that if it all goes horribly wrong, then it's going to be a complete catastrophe. That's Saudi. So, we're hoping that KSA will follow, and so will the other Gulf states and eventually the other Arab markets, and eventually you will be able to look at what the viewing is across all those territories.
Mm. And so have you seen spend increase online as a result of your measurement?
Well, yeah, I can relate a story. When we started, we've been in the market for 4 years, and I think when we first started, the total spend was about 40 million on digital. Now I believe it's around 270.
270 million?
Yeah. Well, that's the going kind of comment that's out in the market. Again, that's not quantified yet, but... And I'm not saying that we're responsible for that, but it's certainly, and there's a kind of a key moment when I sat with the media director, the then media director for Unilever, and he actually got up and gave me a hug because it was the first time that it enabled him to unlock a whole bunch of budget towards digital because he couldn't internally without this type of measurement because it was a box he had to tick. And so that has enabled multinationals and then more recently, certainly local brands to spend more because there's more confidence in where the money's going and more understanding as to what digital means. Because if you can quantify it, if you can break it down by channel and highlight where the audience is, it just makes the process so much more simple and worthwhile as an investment.
So in many ways, you've shown that the future, what can be done, what can occur. I mean, with television, this isn't a new problem, is it? So why hasn't this solution been put in place before? What's preventing it happening, and why do you think you're going to be able to get it off the ground now after
how many minutes have we got? I think
not too many.
Yes, some of that is possibly discussion that takes place offline, but there's a lot of politics involved, and I understand why. For something to be established like this, everybody, there are hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. I mean, the TV market is probably really $1 billion. If you take rate cards, it'll be $3 billion. So there's a lot at stake, and people are not going to change what they're doing lightly. They need to trust, and in previous, what's happened in previous attempts is that there isn't a culture of the whole industry getting together and working across the different sectors. You've got the broadcasters, you've got the agencies, and you've got the advertisers, the clients, and there aren't strong industry bodies. There is no sort of culture or tradition of them working all together. So previous attempts by one party, the others have mistrusted it. And so really a lot of what we spend our time on, the technical side of it, it's not rocket science. It's there. As I say, it happens in 60 countries around the world. We're not inventing any wheels here. Mainly our job is getting out to the market and getting them to trust us and trust that nobody is fiddling the figures. And we've got further than anybody else has got. We've actually got it up and running. And I think we're at the stage now where everybody who should be engaged is at least engaged and is at least talking to us. They're not fully committed to it yet, but we have a pathway to get there. And I think my hope is that I can come back this time next year, seriously, and say, right, everybody, all the stakeholders are now actually engaged and are using this.
Who is it? Who are you talking about here? The broadcasters?
The biggest one we're talking about is NBC. I mean, they are the dominant media player in this market, and they are what attracts most of the commercial dollars.
So if NBC adopt the system, you're hopeful that others will follow?
If NBC adopted this system, everybody else would have to follow. Yes.
And how confident are you that they are going to do that?
I'm confident that, in a year's time that they will be on board. We're going through a process now, which we've agreed with NBC and Shweri Group and Dubai Media, Shweri Group represents those two organisations. We've agreed a process of bringing in external auditors, international auditors. They're reviewing the system, and they're going to produce a report which will be available to everybody. And we hope that report will say that we're doing an okay job. And because they've been part of setting up this process, that will lead to them now becoming part of the system.
And do you anticipate there then being more converged buys taking place so that people will buy across television and online? Is that what you'd hope would occur?
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing growth towards digital anyway, and with the advent of video online, which with faster internet speeds and so on, and certainly on mobile devices, video content, long-form content is going to be available, as mentioned obviously earlier, across multiple screens. So there is a need for measurement for both sides of the house, broadcasters and digital, but ultimately we need to merge those two together because media is media, audience is audience, and we need to find a solution to provide a cross-media platform, and I think that's something that will eventually happen because that is the future. We need to understand the reach of content to a specific type of audience across different platforms to enable advertisers to further, I guess, benefit from their investment.
Can I just add something to that? I was just speaking to a colleague in Scandinavia early this week. They're about to do a new tender for what was their TV rating service. The new tender will ask the supplier to simply measure video content. They don't care any longer whether it's on TV or on YouTube or anywhere. It will just say, tell me how many people watched my video.
And that's the future.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that makes it easier for buyers.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, are they the ones that are going to drive this, do you think? Is it demand from buyers, from agencies that will drive?
It should be. It absolutely should be the brands that are insisting on this, and they have played their role, absolutely. Obviously, they hold the money, so if it's in their interest to ensure that they're able to be effective with their media spend. So all these systems that are put in place will benefit them ultimately. Agencies need these tools to again do a better job. Without these tools, it's very much a scattergun approach, and how do you understand really how your money is being spent? So I think the inertia is coming from brands. I think we've seen it in the past, more multinational brands, but I think even going into the future, it's going to be local brands as well.
And could you estimate, how much money is being left on the table? I mean, have you thought about the potential size of the market if there's a common currency and a transparent measurement system?
I mean, the estimate is if you benchmark the MENA region against, say, Asia Pacific, it's about a third of the size that it should be. And so 3 times as much money should be in this market.
How much is that?
Well, I mean, we're talking about probably $1 billion in terms of advertising spend. I mean, that's not even content and creative, that's just ad spend. So 3 billion plus.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about how, I mean, it's a panel-based system, so you have boxes in people's houses?
Yes. So it operates the same way that Nielsen do the ratings in the US, Barb in the UK. We have boxes in people's houses. It's a representative sample of the whole UAE population. So it covers, the UAE nationals, Arab expats, Asian, Indian population. It's one of the challenges of doing it in this market, the UAE in particular, because we have such a diverse population and very big differences. But you select your sample according to what you can establish as the general picture of the whole population, put boxes in the homes of people who are willing to cooperate, and then it uses a matching technology that picks up the signal each couple of seconds and then can show you on a minute-to-minute basis if somebody is watching TV. So you start to see really interesting patterns of behaviour. You see there's been a tendency here because the previous system only looks at 15-minute blocks. So you don't know what people are watching in an ad break. And so the broadcasters have 8-9-minute long ad breaks. And what we see is that in the middle of one of those ad breaks, they've lost 70% of their audience. The audience has actually developed behaviours in response to this, where they go and find a movie channel and watch that for 5 minutes, and then come back to watch the program that they were watching before. We also see things like the fact that where broadcasters and people have been assuming that there was a lot of brand loyalty or channel loyalty, it's not. The audience moves like a herd of wildebeest between channels. Program stops, off they go. And again, long ad breaks, long segments are the problem. So, there are ways around that. And if you look at television in other markets where they have this sort of technology, they have shorter breaks. They go from one program into another without a long transition. You have to adapt behaviours to reflect what the audience wants.
So there's a certain degree of reticence from upsetting the state from what people are familiar with?
It's going to be very disruptive. It's hugely disruptive. It's disruptive to broadcasters in terms of changing the way they program. It's disruptive to agencies in terms of the way they have to buy and plan. And to some extent, to your question previously about the advertisers driving this, I mean, yes, they should be. I think in TV it's a double-edged sword, because the end result of this should be to make it more expensive to advertise on TV. But they should be happier in that, okay, now maybe they spend the same amount in their budget, but they know that it's being spent more effectively.
Yeah. Did anyone have any questions for the chaps? Yes, sir. Wait for the mic 1 sec. Thank you. If you could say who you are, where you're from.
Nick Grandy, channel sculptor. Chris, just to pick up on something you said earlier on, TVU is a UAE initiative, population of 8 million people. The broadcast market is pan-Arab or at least pan-GCC, and Saudi is the big driver. And so if you're an advertiser and you want to reach a Saudi audience, and that's where your budget is being spent, how can you use TVU data? Have you come up with any incentives or any ways to encourage advertisers to actually think about using TVU in a world where they're primarily concerned about markets, or at least UAE is not their primary concern? It's certainly a concern.
Yeah. Two sort of observations on that. One is, I don't accept the view that that we buy for Saudi and UAE doesn't matter. There's no, again, it would be like a big multinational in Europe, electronics producer, whatever, saying, I don't care about Denmark. I don't, the fact that this is a smaller market is only because the current way of doing things is to, go into a darkened room with a shotgun and blast away and hope you hit something. We're giving people a sniper rifle and a spotlight. So, no longer will people say, I don't care about UAE, I don't care about Qatar or whatever. They will be able to say, I do care about that market. And a huge amount of selling goes on here. It may not be population-wise, but you look at some very big brands, car brands and so on, their sales in the UAE are way out of proportion in terms of what you would expect in terms of population. So for a start, in some ways I don't accept the premise of the question, but to actually, okay, so that's the behaviour we have to deal with at the moment, is that they're used to dealing with Saudi. And I think what we're seeing, and we've seen in the last few months really, a big push from some of the advertisers to say to the agencies, look, we want you to look at this data and we can learn things. I mean, if 70% of the audience in the UAE turns off in the middle or changes channels in the middle of an 8-minute ad break, why would you think that's any different in Saudi? So, you can start to make some reasonable assumptions about behaviours, even if you're not getting the actual viewing data in other markets. So that's, I think, how people are starting to use it. Yeah.
Anyone else? There's a chap here.
Hello, my name is Ayman Safan from 2454. I have a clarification. The lady in the previous session mentioned that during the TV watching, people have the habit of using a second screen, tablets basically. So how does your system monitors or implies this and the impact of this? Obviously, it may not necessarily translate into switching channels, but actually diverting attention.
Correct.
Thanks.
We don't, neither of our systems do that. I mean, the ultimate quest in audience measurement is what's called a single source panel. We would all love to have a panel where you monitored all their activity, their activity on their tablets, on their PCs, on their television, radio, hey, even buying, consumer buying and things like that. That would just, if you could do that, you'd be made. But it's very difficult to do because actually just sometimes because of getting people to comply. There's a lot of work involved in being on these panels. So at the moment, I'm not aware, Brendon may know more about it, but I'm not aware of anyone that does, manages to do that. You have to fuse the data. So you have to take Brendon's data and my data and put it together.
That's the most common method, yeah. I mean, there are single source panels out there globally, but it's pretty rare because it's an expensive thing to operate. And what we're doing with the online is metering PCs and laptops, those devices, and we're building a panel for mobile as well. So it'll be a single source between those two screens, and ultimately we'll have to shake hands with this guy next door and actually fuse those two elements together, because that's ultimately going to satisfy
but
the holy grail, if you like.
Sorry, yeah. Can I just add, there has been some one-off research on this. ESPN and BBC have both done some major studies looking at how people use their second screens with their televisions. And the really interesting thing is people who consume content on multiple devices actually watch more TV, not less TV. They're not, the phrase that I've heard used, I wish I'd coined it, is new markets of time. They're not doing this instead of watching TV. They're doing it in other places. They're doing it on the bus. They're doing it, when they're sitting in a session at a conference. And then they actually watch more TV. So in the Olympics, they found that people who watched Olympic content on tablet, PC, and mobile watched twice as many hours of television content as people who only watch television content. So there is a really positive reinforcement.
Video content,
yeah. Video, yeah.
Great. Okay, well, we've got to leave it there, but thank you very much for attending. I'm sorry we don't have time, but if you want to grab the guys after,
okay, fine.
That'd be cool. Great. But thank you very much. If you could join me in thanking Chris and Brendon.